Rob, thanks for coming back.
You're welcome, Jeremiah.
I don't know if I need to introduce you. My listeners should already know who you are.
It's fine by me.
Do you want to go ahead and give them the brief little introduction of who you are?
Okay, brief. That's a hard one, but I'll try. New York City, born and raised, big Jewish family. Peace Corps volunteer and staff member in Tunisia during the 1967 war, which has relevance to my being here in many ways, because I saw the war from Tunis, not from Brooklyn. And then came to Colorado and in short order got into graduate school, met my wife-to-be, and got a job. And never dreamed that I would spend the next 55 years in Colorado.
Yeah, Colorado's great.
Yeah.
It
beats the heck out of where I came from.
Now, you worked at DU also.
Yes, I did. In terms of my jobs, so Peace Corps is actually a job. And then the rest of my career is entirely teaching in higher education here in Colorado. Red Rocks Community College, first years, Metro State. And during those years, I was basically a one-man anthropology department. That's really what my academic training is in. And then in 1992, I got hired on at University of Denver's, at that time it was called the Graduate School of International Studies, to teach global political economy, adjunct. And the next year, they hired me. And I spent the rest of my academic career at the University of Denver, and then retired in 2015, that is to say 9 years ago. So I was there for almost a quarter of a century.
You said of international studies?
Basically, I taught global political economy, the introductory courses, was basically the history of the global economy and how it shifted since the 1500s or so. And then the area of specialty which I had has always been the Middle East and North Africa. But there, the driving interest was energy, was the politics and the economics of energy in the region. And more in terms of my professional interests, I was focused on two countries, one of which had a lot of oil, that is to say Algeria, but still had a very kind of painful post-colonial history, which continues. And the other was Tunisia, that had no oil, and in an interesting way, at least for much of the time, did a lot better. So that was my focus. But if you're talking about the Middle East, you're in the Arab world. You're talking about North Africa, you're in the Arab world. And even though, quite frankly, Tunisia and Algeria are something like 1,500 miles away from Israel-Palestine, and the actual fighting intention is on the minds of everybody there. And it's part of the same, if you like, generic history. But it was an interesting way to learn about the modern Arab world and to learn about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And I've always been very grateful that I had those years in North Africa, which are just, I was very young and did a lot of dumb things, which I won't talk about. Mostly hitchhiking to places I never should have done. But those were the years where afterwards all I wanted to do was study where was this that I spent 3 years, close to 3 years, and what an interesting part of the world. I mean, it's one of the reasons I went into teaching, was just to continue studying that region.
Yeah, last time you were on, we talked about, basically, if I had to summarize it, I would say the formation and the beginning of the State of Israel. Mm-hmm. And we did not get an opportunity to start talking about the current conflict and what's going on right now, present day, after October 7th. Well, I say that loosely because obviously there was a lot going on before October 7th as well. But so there seems to be like this really big focus on October 7th. Mm-hmm. And a lot of people who label themselves to be pro-Israel, they don't want to talk about anything October 6th
Right.
and previous. They're basing all the current events on October 7th, not mentioning that there was a lot of conflict directly before the attack on October 7th. There were a lot of back and forths on the West Bank between the IDF and a lot of people in the West Bank. There was the continued abuses at the mosque in
Al-Aqsa Mosque.
Al-Aqsa.
Yes.
Yeah, mosque, and the warnings that came out of Gaza to
You're right.
to Israel, the government and the IDF to stop abusing Palestinians, and then this attack. I'm not saying that the October 7th attack happened because of one thing or the other, but there's definitely a lot more things to talk about. So yeah, have you ever been to Israel?
No, I haven't. No, I've been. I've seen it from southern Lebanon. I've seen it from the Syrian Golan Heights. But I've not been to Israel. Shortly after the 1967 war, which for me was kind of a wake-up call and a shock about Israel's relationship with the Palestinians and its neighbors, I made a commitment to myself that I wouldn't visit Israel until the occupation of the 1967 territories was over and that land had been returned to Syria and Egypt and Jordan. And I thought that would just be a few years. And that's, what are we now? I don't even know. It's 56 years ago. Yeah. So I've never been. But I've been elsewhere. I've actually been elsewhere in that region. I've been all around it, but I have not been to Israel.
Yeah, I wanted to ask that. I know that question, it kind of seemed a little out of place, but I wanted to ask that at the beginning because if we're going to talk about this, I definitely want to know your connection to Israel. Being Jewish,
right?
There's also a deeper conversation that I've seen a lot of the pro-Israeli Jewish side speaking against the anti-Zionist Jewish side, and it's kind of that whole funk there.
Yeah.
And then I also wanted to ask you: do you know people that live there, and have you spoke
in Israel?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Have you spoke to them about what they think?
Oh, sure, plenty of them. Yeah, including relatives. Yeah. Well, let me think where to start that. Well, my interest. I mean, I grew up without a long discussion of it, but I grew up in a deeply religious, particularly on my mom's side, Jewish family. We were what were called conservative Jews, so not the Orthodox, not the Reform, but the conservatives, and also grew up in the era of that movie Exodus, the importance of which, in terms of shaping a pro-Israeli narrative, in those days cannot be underestimated. So, I mean, I had an aunt who took me to see Exodus not once, not twice, but 3 times. Right? So to grow up in New York City in the 1950s, when I grew up in the early 60s, Israel was just seen as this, wondrous place, a salvation place for Jewish folks from what happened in the Holocaust, etc. That was the environment I grew up in, for sure. And I would just simply say that winding up in Tunisia, the only reason I wound up in Tunisia in the Peace Corps is they assigned me there, which was fine. But I remember when I got the acceptance message. In fact, the day I got the acceptance message was the day I came home from college, and I actually got 2 fully paid invitations for foreign travel. I never had anything like that.
It's a good day.
Yeah, well, the first was my draft notice to go to Vietnam. It's the height of the Vietnam War. And the other was this invitation to join the Peace Corps in Tunisia. I didn't know where Tunisia was, classic American, didn't know much geography or quite frankly, not too much anything else. And all of a sudden I realized, oh my gosh, it's an Arab country. So my choices were, well, get drafted, go to Vietnam, or probably, you didn't really know, or go to an Arab country in the Peace Corps. I agonized for about I would say, a millionth of a second, and decided that I would rather build bridges than blow them up. And that's still part of how I see things. And so I did serve my country. People say, you didn't serve. I did serve my country. I served my country in the Peace Corps.
Yeah, you don't have to kill people to serve your
That's
country.
right. Of course not. Yeah. And so I wind up in Tunisia. And, before you go, there's actually, I don't know what it's like anymore, but in the days that I was involved in it, we're talking about the summer of 1966, Peace Corps training was really, it was pretty rigorous. Language training, culture, history stuff. But still, you get to the place and, this is a foreign country for a Jewish kid from Brooklyn, to put it mildly. And then over the period, I'd say about 6 months, because in the beginning, it's not so simple. It's not easy. You begin to realize a couple of things. First of all, that this is one of the most sophisticated and cosmopolitan places in the world. It's just a crossroads between Europe and Africa, crossroads between West North Africa, East North Africa, crossroads between, it's so many different historical influences that are there. And so the notion that somehow you're going to a place to help or educate or modernize or whatever term you want to use, this backward people, that just evaporated. And what you have instead is, this is a cool place that I know nothing about, and I could actually learn something about another part of the world. And in fact, I don't think that was a unique response. My fellow Peace Corps volunteers at the time, we all went through something like that. And then you kind of relax, You're not there as some kind of secular missionary. You're there, I was a teacher, I've always been, so you're there to teach a particular subject, but mostly you realize how fortunate you are to live somewhere else in the world and to get this kind of perspective of another world. And I just found that, I just loved it. And that happened, not all of us, but to most of us that happened. So much so that here we are, 55, 56 years later, I'm still in touch almost weekly with Peace Corps volunteers that I was in Tunisia with. We never lost touch. It was a very powerful experience for us. And and for me, it just opened me up to all kinds of things. But one of the things it opened me up to was a different view of the Arab-Israeli conflict. Okay, but we were going to talk about current day stuff, right? And some of this stuff I assume that I've just been through, we talked about last time, although I can't remember the details.
Yeah, we did. Yeah,
I can't remember.
Yeah, it's all right. Yeah, I know. It's easy just to kind of talk, especially for you, man. You've got a lot of experience in life and in the world. So. And
I grew up talking. My wife's worried I'm going to die talking.
You can talk as much as you want here. That's what we do here. This is your perfect playground right here.
Oh, anyhow.
So you still communicate with people in Israel?
Yeah, I do.
And what are their thoughts in general? Because I know there's a lot of splits with the Israeli population as well. Over the years, I've had a number of Israeli friends. Mostly, not all of them, but most of them were Israeli peace activists, i.e. For however they wanted to put it, they kind of got it that this relationship between Israel and the Palestinians was really very unhealthy, and something had to change, and the Palestinians should have their land and a state in the West Bank and Gaza, something like that. But I have family members who have spent a lot of time in Israel and kind of on the religious deep end, as far as I'm concerned. The ones at this point,
I've been in touch. There was an Israeli professor named Menachem Klein, Klein. If I remember right, he teaches at the Hebrew University. And many years ago, and now we're talking probably 20, he came to Denver, and it was him and a Palestinian brother. And we organized events for the two of them. And a deeply religious guy. I mean, his main problem was, where can I go on Friday night? Where's a synagogue? And he's Orthodox. Where's an Orthodox synagogue? I've got to go to an Orthodox synagogue. And he's still writing about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And he's very sharp.
What's his name?
Menachem, Menachem, Menachem Klein, Klein. If you Google him, his stuff will come up.
And he's Palestinian?
No, he's Israeli.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
You said there was another Palestinian guy also that was with him. Is that what you were saying?
Well, there was. That's right. They came as a team. And the idea was, on some level, that both the Israelis and the Palestinians, number one, could be in dialogue with each other, all right? And number two, could talk about, at least in a generic way, moving towards some solution to the crisis. So I was really impressed with both the respect that Menachem Klein showed his Palestinian partner and vice versa. I've seen these kind of things before, but that was on a whole other level. And he's written a number of he's a very interesting strategic thinker. And he's written stuff since October 7th. I just scanned one thing that he wrote. He's very concerned about the future of Israel at this point. But his concern is not just about Israel. It's also about the Palestinians. So what I look for, and why I always had this respect for Klein, was his caring on some kind of really deep level in his heart and gut, not just for Israeli Jews but for Palestinians as well. And that seems to be where you have that. That's going to be a bridge, hopefully, for even in the midst of the horror we're looking at today, for some kind of peaceful settlement. So yes, I'm in touch with them and a couple of others. There was one who he's quite a figure. He's gone. His name is Yuri Avneri, and people, Jews who are familiar with, if you like, Israelis who had a long history of saying we've got to find ways to get together, they would know the name Yuri Avneri. It's very well known, and his wife. I believe her name was Rachel. And I was in touch with him until he died, and his stuff that he wrote was really wonderful. So those were the ones that I stayed in touch with and tried to and continue to stay in touch with. Although what I would say about that is that these elements that we could broadly define as being part of the Israeli peace movement are much smaller today than they were 20, 30 years ago. The Israeli peace movement, Israeli left, whatever you want to call it, is shrunk quite a bit. So, but those are the ones that I stay in touch with. Some of the others, particularly since October 7th, it's difficult to be in dialogue with them. It's not like, frankly, I have no problem in a respectful way being in contact with them, but they're not interested at this point. So hopefully that will pass.
And one more, and I'm kind of these questions kind of go to laying a foundation.
All right.
to who Rob Prince is, because I feel like if we're going to have a conversation about the current conflict, there's always groups that just pick and choose. Well, he's got to be on this side. He's this. He's that. When you kind of break the mold, because another thing, in my
mother
opinion,
said that to me.
Yeah, or they broke the mold after they made you, right?
She also said, "Why do you always do things the hard way?"
Yeah. Another thing that a lot of people that I've seen on the pro-Israel side say against the Jews who are critics against Zionism and the state of Israel and what they do, is that those Jews, they're not really religious. They're not practicing Jews. they're leftist liberal, basically left liberal, non-practicing Jews.
Well, you know what that does? That does typify me to a T. That's exactly what I am. I've never been embarrassed about it or tried to deny it. And so they got a point about that. Although let's not overstate it. I mean, just talking to you about Menahem Klein, who was very religious, and actually it's a kind of a nice segue into this whole new flowering of what are anti-Zionist Jews today. And these are folks that are in groups like Jewish Voice for Peace, or the other one, which is called Not in Our Name. And these are mostly young Jews under the age of 40, who define themselves as anti-Zionists. And what's interesting to me about these young folk is many of them, at least the one, again, I admit it's anecdotal because they're the ones that I've met, they're religious. In fact, I met them first at a Rosh Hashanah service. So this is several years ago. I get an announcement that there's a group of local Denver Jews, and they're going to do what they call an anti-Zionist Rosh Hashanah.
What's a Rosh Hashanah?
I'm sorry. Okay, good question. Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year. It takes place in September. There's actually two holidays. One is Rosh Hashanah, which is 2 days, a first day and a second day. And then 10 days later is what's considered the holiest day of the year, and it's called Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. And so, I mean, when I was a kid, Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, that was very serious stuff, and I participated in it and all that kind of stuff. But, more recently, I'm not interested. I've never been going to a synagogue where I'm going to hear all kinds of stuff about Israel that I challenge. So I stayed away. Anyhow, so I go to an anti-Zionist Rosh Hashanah. All right, it's not in a synagogue, but it's in someone's backyard, the Tamarack neighborhood of Denver. And there's 40 or 50 young folks there. Of the 40 or 50 young folks, there's 2 of us over the age of 40, okay? I'm actually almost double that age. I'll be 80 in a few months. And everybody else is young, and half of them are wearing, now this is before October 7th, a year before, they're wearing Free Gaza T-shirts. I'm saying, wait a second, am I dreaming? But I wasn't, and not only that, so that was interesting, and it's just for me, it's like, wow, this is kind of, I'd never seen anything like it, to be honest. Then I listened to the service. Now, it's true, I am quite secular, and make a big deal about it, but that's who I am. But there was a time when I could recite a 3.5-hour Jewish service in Hebrew, and I knew it well. I've long forgotten it, most of it. But I know, jarred my memory a little bit, but I'm watching how the service was done. The service was conducted by 2 women. One, she didn't call herself a rabbi, but she essentially played the role of the rabbi. And then there was another one who played the role of the cantor, the one who sings the sacred songs. It was wonderful. But I mention this because what struck me, oh yes, and at the end of that, one of the fellows there comes up to me and says, well, what are you doing for Yom Kippur? And he's very concerned about I'm a secular person. I said, nothing. I hardly celebrate Jewish holidays anymore. And I could see he was shocked. All right, my point here, finally getting to it, is this new generation of young Jews who are critical of Israel are religious. They're deeply religious. And I'm still in touch with many of these folks. We do stuff together. I help them out. They do the stuff, but I say, I'll come too, and I do. They go to Sabbath almost every week. They prepare for whatever Jewish holiday is coming. They study the Torah, the very long, if you like, explanation of Jewish history of how do you do this, how do you do that. They're religious. And it has added a dimension to what I would call Jewish anti-Zionism that wasn't there. And it's a very, very healthy and wholesome thing. Because these folks, in my mind, or maybe it's just wishful thinking, I see them the seed of a Judaism that can separate itself from Zionism. We'll see if that's true. But anyhow, your friend's stereotype, I hate to say it, was probably pretty accurate until recently, and now it's not. It's a different ballgame. Now, if you're going to ask me why, I don't know why. I have no idea.
Well, he's not a friend of mine. I don't. It was several people I've heard say that. And
well, there's some truth to
different
that.
interviews.
Yes.
I don't know these people personally, but so you wouldn't say you're not necessarily religious, or you would say you're not?
I'm not religious. I'm secular.
So you fit all of those.
Yes. Yeah. Oh yeah.
So do those exclude you from? And people like you, would it exclude you from having an opinion about what's going on? Because they always pull that card.
Right.
I see that they pulled that card and saying, well, these people can't say anything because they're not like us. But then I've also seen Israelis that are atheists. I've seen a lot of interviews with Israelis that are atheists.
You got it.
So they're not even professing to be Jewish. And apparently they can't even vote if they're not Jewish, but they're Israeli. It just gets deep and it confuses me a little bit. Well,
it's just kind of a narrow cultural model, if you like. Who's human? Who's part of the group, and who isn't? Couple things about that. One is early on. I mean, we're married 49 years, I think, together 55. The whole time I'm here, and I've been involved in this stuff from the beginning. And Nance, my wife, is she's not Jewish. She grew up in a Unitarian family, and their background is Methodist from Nebraska. That's where they come from. But we were visiting some friends, Jewish friends, who we were talking about two-state solution. Now, this isn't like 1972 or 3. And one of the guys was kind of a big shot trade unionist at the time. And his wife worked with the American Friends Service Committee. In fact, she did their Middle East work. And we were just talking about stuff. And Nance chimed in with something. And the woman involved looked at her and said, "Your opinion doesn't count because you're not Jewish." Okay, that just was branded in her soul, that she cannot have an opinion on what's going on in this on this issue because she's not Jewish. And really, all that is it's a lot of BS, if you'll pardon my French. It really is. It's nonsense. This is not an issue. This is not an issue just for Jews. This is an international issue for everybody. This is a global issue, and everybody has a stake in it. And but she never forgot that, and neither did I. It was like, what do you mean? What, she can't have an opinion? Well, that's silly. You don't understand. Baloney. You know, I mean, I talk to Jewish people who are very Zionist about their history. I want to tell you, they don't know their history either, you know, other than stereotypically speaking. So that's the first point. The second point, though, had to do with people like myself who were secular, who were on the left, okay? There are people who are ashamed of being on the left. I'm proud of it. I've been on the left my whole adult life. I'll be on the left till the day I die. Nobody's going to take that away from me, okay? Now, I'm not sure what it even means anymore, but I will say this. In those early years, you know, so I come out of a Jewish community in New York City. I come here, there's a Jewish community here, and it's a very active. And, you know, if you could get away from the Israeli-Palestinian issue, it's a vibrant community. It's a wonderful community. But considering that I came out early on, critical of Israel, yes, basically it was people like me, Jewish critics of Israel, who who they began to attack. So you began hearing what I would refer to as stupid and meaningless expressions like that I was a self-hating Jew. I don't even know what that means. It's just dumb. And other things. There were some very interesting years where delegations of important Jews from Denver would go to my workplace and ask I be fired. That happened to me 3 or 4 times, including as recently as when I was at the University of Denver. Happened once then. So the question is, what's the deal if some, isolated little left-oriented Jew from New York comes to Denver and criticizes Israel? Is that such a terrible threat? And the answer is yes.
So tell us
So what is the threat? Oh, okay. Well, I've alluded to them. I will tell you one story because it's very funny.
Well, I want to hear your criticisms.
My criticisms of what?
Of Israel.
Well, we'll get into that for sure. I mean, my criticism is not complicated. But one story, okay, so there had been this group. They went when I was at Red Rocks. Prominent, not just, there's rabbis and then there are rabbis, the prominent rabbis of town, along with some of the biggest Jewish community leaders. They go to the president of my college and say I shouldn't be fired. I should be fired. And he says, why? By the way, the guy is a Republican, all right? He's what used to be called a moderate Republican.
The president?
The president of the college. Yes, yeah. His name was G. Owen Smith. He came out of Pueblo. And he says, well, what's wrong with Rob? And they, say, well, he's a critic of Israel. G. Owen Smith throws him out of the office. And then he calls me in and he said, you know who just came? I had no idea. And then he laughed and he says, you're always getting in trouble, Prince, aren't you? I mean, he saved my life. He did it more than once, too. So there was that. Well, after they went to G. Owen Smith, I had a friend at the time. Now, this is Denver half a century ago. It's a long time ago. But there was a Catholic priest, and there's a little parish, Guadalupe, Our Lady of Guadalupe Church. It's in northwest Denver. Somewhere around like La Pan and 34th or 35th in there. It's still there. And it was a focal point for a lot of immigrants from Mexico and Central America. And it was also kind of a place where good stuff, peace activities, civil rights activities took place. And his name was Father Jose Lara, who was later on kicked out of the church by the archdiocese here for... I can't remember why. Anyhow, he calls me. He says, Rob, your people, I didn't know who he was talking about, are going to come visit me. I said, what? And he says, oh, yeah, there's a delegation of the Jewish community. I said, oh, it's the same delegation. And I said, well, what do I have to do with this visit? Oh, they've already told me they want to convince me that I should cut my relations with you. I didn't know what can I say? He says, let's have some fun. The guy had an interesting sense of what fun is. I want you to come and hide in the closet. And when they start talking about you, I'll open the closet door and say, why don't you tell this to this guy to his face? And that's what he did. And that's exactly what he did. So they start talking about this guy. I'm listening to how they're referring to me. And I'm thinking, boy, that guy's terrible. Talking about me. And then Jose just says, why don't you tell Prince this to his face? Why are you telling me? Opens the door. Okay. That was probably my finest moment in, oh yeah, they didn't know what to do. Oh, they just turned white. They left. They screamed. One of the people.
They didn't say anything?
Oh, they were really upset.
And who are these people?
Well, I don't, names at this point, they're all dead, by the way, but at the time, they were the leadership or a significant part of the leadership of the mainstream Jewish community in Denver.
Okay.
And that's what they do there. Now look, that's a half a century ago, all right? There are other things that have happened, but at a certain point, they just left me alone. All right, and that's preferable. But the bottom line was that, quote, Jews like myself were really isolated from the community. Now, I had several friends, one of whom just died, Dick Gould, who, I mean, there would be, something would happen in Israel, and usually it was, Israel was doing something terrible to Palestinians. And there'd be four of us that would be out demonstrating. Nancy, me, Dick Gould, and his wife. Okay, now why I mentioned Dick Gould? Because Dick Gould was able to maintain his relationship with his synagogue and the mainstream community. And our views on, what to do, or our analysis was the same. So it was people like Dick Gould that I always had this great respect for, because they couldn't isolate him all the way they did, isolate me. But anyhow, a lot of that is history. And the interesting thing now is that this new generation of young Jews who have become radicalized on the issue of Israel and Palestine, that they belong to synagogues and they belong to the mainstream community. And their parents and their grandparents were among, community leaders and very much committed to Zionism in Israel. So that's a really interesting new reality in the Jewish community here, and it's not just in Denver; it's nationwide. We're seeing that happen, and that's, to me, it's very hopeful thing.
But those people are not in Israel, so.
Well, they all have. Yeah, no, they're here. They're in the United States, but they all have. You talk to these young folks in Jewish Voice for Peace or not in my name, and they all have a brother or a cousin or family members that are they have those connections deep. Yes. So no, mine are compared to theirs are quite modest. Yeah.
And you look at the groups that are in Israel of Jews and or Israelis or Israelis that are atheists, or any groups that are that have, I guess you would call it Israeli citizenship. I don't know what you would call that, but you look at these different groups, and there seems to also be some difference of opinion.
Great tension, yeah,
of how to handle the situation.
Yes,
with their own country, with the Palestinians, but there are a lot of Israelis that seem to not want the Palestinians there at all.
Okay, yes. I mean, if you look at some of the recent surveys that have been done in Israeli society, how is Israel handling the assault on Gaza? The statistics, to me, they're chilling. 70% of Israelis feel that Israel isn't hard enough at this point. So when it comes to Gaza and when it comes to the Palestinians, those different trends tend to converge into a kind of an anti-Palestinian front, which has now never been stronger than it is, with the Netanyahu government presently. But there also is kind of a long history, which I think I can summarize in the following way. If you really look at the founders of Israel, most of them were secular. So Ben-Gurion, Golda Meir, people like that, the kind of famous Herzl himself. And when Israel was founded, they ran the show. They were the more secular elements, and they were also secular, and they tended to come from, their origins were European, Eastern European, whatever. What came later, or what soon thereafter, were the Jews from the Arab world, as they're called, the Mizrahi Jews. And there were Jews all over the Arab world. So they came from Egypt, and they came from Iraq, and they came from Algeria and Tunisia and places like that. And what has happened over the last decade or so, because what's happening now is really had a long history in Israel, is that the more secular Zionists have who are more liberal in the American sense of the term, their hold on power has been reduced. And there's this alliance of super religious Zionist Jews who see the whole Israeli project in terms of Greater Israel, and they have made alliances with these Jews from the Arab world, the Mizrahi Jews, and that's really who Netanyahu represents in this coalition. So
the other group, the Ashkenazi,
the other group referred to as Ashkenazi. Yes. Like my family were Ashkenazi Jews from Poland and Belarus and Lithuania, places like that. But there were big Jewish communities throughout the Arab world, and I wouldn't say all of them, but an awful lot of them, a very high percentage of them left their countries in the late 40s and early 50s. Some went to France or came here to the United States, England, but many of them wound up in Israel. And they are emerging along with the super religious Ashkenazi types to form a kind of this right-wing coalition that Netanyahu represents. And so when you see a statistic that 70% of the Israeli population thinks that the Israeli military hasn't gone far enough in Gaza, when the United Nations and now the International Court of Justice considers what Israel is doing a genocide, that's a pretty incredible statement on where the Israeli public is today.
And you heard people like Jared Kushner recently said that we need to get the Palestinians out of Gaza, remove them so that we can develop it and create oceanfront property for Israelis.
Yeah.
Can you believe that? That's just
it's hard to believe, but I could believe. I mean, I won't use the word. I think of Kushner, in a world, blankhead.
In a world,
it's just a. What am I going to say?
In a world where people get canceled, right?
Right.
Like I could get canceled for talking about Israel or whatever, however anybody interprets what I'm saying or not saying. But somebody can say, let's just move 2 million people out of their home.
Yeah, right.
And steal the land and develop it for oceanfront property, and he doesn't even get in trouble for saying that.
And let's start doing it before they've been kicked out or whatever. All right, a little perspective on that. So
to expand on that really quick. Sorry to interrupt you.
No, go right ahead.
By doing that, are you talking about they brought in that developer? I seen on this news article that they brought in this big time settlement developer.
Oh, right.
I forget his name. They brought him in to the area that they control right now, and they're already taking out all the concrete and everything that's demolished. Yeah. They have huge open, just acres and acres of just dirt where buildings used to be that's now been removed. And they have this developer guy that came in, and he's designing right now. They're already there's renderings and designs that have already hit the internet.
That's correct.
And those people are dying right now in those areas, starving to death, dying, getting bombed, and people are drawing up plans for their land. It's almost just beyond evil. It's just sadistic.
Yes, it is. I mean, you're using the term, but you're expressing.
And for the record, I'm not pro-Palestinian and I'm not anti-Israel. I'm just stating what I see.
Yeah. Well, what you're seeing is what's going on. So let's talk about that. And it gets us to talking at least one theme to develop around October 7th and what's happened since. So in order to understand what Israel is up to now, it helps. There's kind of a framework. So there's a modern author. Mostly she deals with a lot of stuff on the environment. Her name is Naomi Klein. And she wrote a book about what she referred to as the shock doctrine, which I really highly recommend. And the basic essence of the shock doctrine is how the United States, but it could really be other places too, implement a policy that they know there's public resistance to, and they can't quite push it through. And so they wait for either a natural disaster or a war or an event like 9/11 or, if you like, October 7th. And then that becomes the starting point when the world is stunned to implement a whole program that they had in the drawer. All right, what's the Israeli program that quote, they had in the drawer? Or as one of my friends puts it, countries have a map on the wall, and then they have the map in the drawer, which is sometimes referred to as their hard-on map. They want to expand or whatever. So in Israel's case, once October 7th took place, they did a couple of things. First, they tried to connect it to 9/11, that this is Israel's 9/11. That really hasn't worked very well, but that was part of it. And then the second thing was they took their map out of the drawer, and the map was for expulsion, ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, not just from Gaza, but also from the West Bank. So if you look at what's happening in the West Bank since October 7th, there's been, I think the number that I saw a few days ago was 5,000 Palestinians in the West Bank have been displaced for Israeli settlements. In Gaza, they just have this whole plan for the resettlement, the re-Zionization of Gaza, which they are implementing even before the war is over. And so, yes, what you said about it and how, well, it's just, you want to talk about genocide, here it is. They're just moving forward as if it's, as if they've already won. I think that they have made a mistake and that they have acted a bit too soon and that this plan is going to go nowhere. Absolutely nowhere. But, that depends on the balance of forces on the ground and how things work out. But it's not looking good for those people who have already bought land in Gaza, which some have.
They've already bought land in Gaza?
Well,
you're talking about non-Palestinians.
Yeah, I'm talking about the same Israeli Jewish contractors and architects and stuff. There were meetings already in New Jersey. There was one that was held.
Oh yeah, I heard about that. Right. It was an auction or something.
Yes, that's right. To buy land in the northern regions of Gaza. So they're moving ahead as if this issue is over and as if they have won. Israel has won, and it has destroyed Hamas, and it has ethnically cleansed the Palestinians out of Gaza. But this is a little premature, let's say, to put it mildly. But yes, it's revealing as to where their heads are at, and it's quite disturbing.
Yeah, you're right about the West Bank. A lot of things have been happening since October 7th. And anytime they go in the West Bank, I've noticed, and they shoot some people and they take some more property or they arrest some people, every single time they say they're Hamas.
Yeah, well,
it's like they're Hamas.
Here's this thing, because right now we're in the midst of a Hamas craze, right? Hamas this, Hamas that. I want to give you just historical perspective. I don't remember if we went over this in the last interview, but in this early period I was referring to just a few minutes ago, in the early 70s, they weren't using the term Hamas then. Then they were using the term Palestine Liberation Organization.
Yeah, the PLO.
The PLO is terrorist. The PLO is, we'll never negotiate with the PLO. And, I mean,
And now the PLO works with the Israelis.
Yes, the Palestinian Authority. Definitely. Yes.
Not PLO.
Well, no, it's
Authority.
More or less the same thing.
Yeah.
To a certain
But
degree.
they're not terrorists, and they're not classified as terrorists.
Well, the thing is that you divide your occupied people into two groups: those who resist and those who don't. And those who don't are the quote the moderates, and those who do resist are the terrorists. And if you look historically, I mean, I remember in the 1970s, and I would get up and I would say the United States should recognize the PLO. And people would say, why? They're terrorists. And I'll say, because they're the representative of the Palestinian people. That's why. Okay, so for I don't know how many years, to get up and to call for representation of the PLO. You would be called whatever, a friend of terrorism and all that kind of nonsense. And then what does the United States begin to do in the mid-1980s? Negotiate with the PLO. My point about Hamas is twofold. First of all, Hamas is not going to go away. If anything, Hamas's respect and prestige among Palestinians has soared. All right?
But even if they do go away,
well, even if they do,
there's still a resistance.
Yes, that's right. There's still a resistance, and if you
can call it whatever you want.
Yeah, right. So wherever there's going to be Palestinian resistance, the Israelis are going to attack it and call it terrorist or whatever. Now, they are engaged in armed struggle. There's no question about that, although it's not just Hamas that's engaged in it. And here, it really depends on how you define the situation. So the way the United Nations defines the Israeli situation is one of its colonized, occupied territories. Yeah, and that the Palestinian people, now let me finish this before you get in. The Palestinian people are an occupied people, and according to international law, occupied, colonized people have a right to resist, including taking up arms. Am I a big advocate of those things? No. I mean, I'm one of those guys that I don't want to hold a gun because I'm probably going to shoot myself in the leg. All right. But that aside, my main concern, it's not to cheerlead for this group or that group. I don't do that. What is U.S. policy, and how can my nation, which has a lot to do with what's going on between Israel and Palestine, how can it become a force for peace rather than supporting war and continued occupation? So that's my concern as to how either the Palestinians or the Israelis define themselves politically. Of course, I have favorites. I would be lying if I didn't. But you know what? Ultimately, it's up to the Palestinians to decide who's their representative, not up to Rob Prince or the Anti-Defamation League or AIPAC. And as far as I remember about negotiations, you negotiate with your opponents. And we're living in this world where we think that we can, those Palestinians, we don't like them, we won't negotiate with them. But those Palestinians, they're okay, they're moderate. That's not how the world works. So this whole stuff about Hamas, to me, is it's just a continuation of what we've seen for a long time, what happened with the PLO. And the other thing is, Hamas is now being used in another way because all Palestinians are considered Hamas. And that opens the door for we can attack all of these people, including their little kids and the ones who are about to be born. And this is what Israeli rabbis, we have to kill these. They're Israeli rabbis are this is encouraging.
In this day and age.
I mean, it's sick as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
So there's that part of it. Well, let's talk a little bit about what's happened about October 7th and what's happened since.
Can I just?
Sure.
I want to go back to a point that you made, and that's what I was going to say earlier. You said it perfectly. It's something that confuses me. If Palestinians are listed as, from what I remember, as the only currently occupied people on the planet.
Yep.
And the law reads, the UN laws, and I don't know if they're entangled with international laws, read that an occupied people have a right to defend themselves by any means necessary, even
use of arms,
use of weapons. But yet when it comes to the Palestinians and them being the only ones that are occupied on the planet currently, we just ignore that. It seems
that's correct. Yes, it's a double standard, and So one has to ask why. Because what we're talking about, believe me, everybody in the U.S. government understands this quite well.
Oh,
they understand
they know.
the legal aspects of it, the humanitarian aspects of it. And so for me, the question is, if the United States understands this, as I am sure they do, why do they encourage it and permit it?
Why is that?
Well, what do you think? I mean, I'll tell you, I'll let you know what I think in a minute. But